Okay, so there's this headline that really jumped out at me. It's Trump to sign order ensuring truckers speak English.
Right.
And, on the surface, it sounds pretty straightforward, but like always, there's probably a lot more going on under the hood. We've looked at an exclusive from Breitbart News, pulled in some other reporting analysis, even dug into accident stats and the actual regulations to really get a grip on this.
Yeah, because this isn't just some minor policy adjustment, is it?
Yeah.
It touches on, well, road safety, obviously,
Mhm.
but also the economy, the transport sector, immigration debates, even, bigger ideas about national identity.
Exactly. So our mission today is really to unpack the arguments, both for and against these tighter English rules for truckers, and figure out what the ripple effects might be.
Sounds good. Where should we start? The order itself.
Yeah, let's dive into the core of what's expected.
Uh,
And the main goal, make sure anyone driving a commercial truck in the U.S. can handle English well enough, which, you'll remember, Trump already made the official language back in March with another EO.
Right, so there's context here. This isn't out of the blue. It builds on that previous step. And the reasoning they're giving, the document apparently calls English proficiency a non-negotiable safety requirement. Yeah. And the logic is, well, drivers need to read traffic signs, obviously, but also communicate effectively with, all sorts of officials, traffic cops, border patrol, agricultural inspectors, guys at way stations,
Makes sense.
and just, exchange basic information, directions, feedback, all in English. You can see the logic when you think about all the interactions a trucker has.
You really can. Imagine trying to sort out a problem at, a border checkpoint if you can't communicate clearly.
Exactly.
So the order apparently tells Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy to basically beef up inspections, make sure drivers actually do meet these English standards.
So enforcement is key here.
Seems like it. The document apparently notes that the existing federal standard for English, well, it hasn't really been enforced much for years.
Okay, that's a critical piece. The rule exists, but maybe hasn't had teeth.
That's the impression. The insight seems to be rule isn't new, but the enforcement is about to get serious.
And that lack of consistent enforcement, that's what this EO seems aimed squarely at fixing. It apparently mandates changing the out-of-service criteria.
Right, those are the rules that say pull over, you're done driving until this is fixed.
Exactly. So under this, not being proficient enough in English could literally get a driver taken off the road immediately.
Wow.
And Duffy's also apparently tasked with looking into CDL authenticity, making sure licenses are legit, and also, interestingly, improving working conditions for truckers.
Huh. That last part's a bit unexpected, but okay.
Yeah.
It adds another dimension.
It does.
And we have to keep linking this back to that March 1st order making English the official language. Remember the goal stated then: national unity, shared culture, government efficiency, civic engagement.
Right.
So this trucking order looks like a very specific application of those bigger ideas. The administration seems to be framing this as both about national cohesion and about making roads safer. The common language idea is central to both arguments.
Okay, so let's dig into those safety concerns a bit more. I mean, it's not hard to imagine how language barriers could cause problems.
No, not at all. Missing a detour sign, not understanding an emergency instruction.
Yeah, or just basic communication breakdown in a critical moment. Our sources mentioned a really tragic fatal crash back in 2021 in Florida involved a truck driver who reportedly couldn't read English.
Just one incident, of course, but it really highlights the potential stakes.
It does, and it's not purely anecdotal either. We're seeing some numbers, like Wyoming. They issued 410 citations just for lack of English proficiency in fiscal year 2024.
4 and 10. That's quite a few. It shows that even with maybe lax enforcement overall, it is being flagged as an issue on the ground in some places.
Right, and it's not just about crashes that have already happened. Inspectors are apparently running into real problems during routine checks if the driver can't communicate.
How so?
Well, think about it. If the driver doesn't understand instructions or can't accurately report a potential problem with the truck, the inspection might not be thorough. Things could get missed.
Ah, okay. So it potentially undermines the whole safety inspection process itself. That raises questions about how effective the current system is if basic communication is a barrier.
Exactly.
And it looks like some states aren't waiting around for the federal government to ramp things up. Arkansas just passed a law, April 15th. $500 fine, first offense for truckers who don't meet English standards.
Wow, $500 is steep. That signals they're taking it seriously at the state level.
Seems so. And you've also got Representative Hageman from Wyoming pushing hard to scrap that Obama-era memo from 2016.
Right, the one about interpreters.
Yeah. That memo apparently gave guidance saying it was okay for a non-English speaking driver to operate if they had an interpreter with them during an inspection. Hageman and others are arguing that just waters down the rule and compromises safety.
Okay, I see the conflict there. The rule says speak English, the memo says an interpreter is okay.
And Oklahoma is apparently thinking about tighter rules, too, especially for drivers on certain temporary visas, B1s and B2s.
It really does feel like that March executive order on English as the official language kicked off a chain reaction. It's building momentum federally and now at the state level, too, to look harder at these rules.
The broader policy context is definitely driving these specific actions in trucking.
So what's the view from inside the industry itself? Are truckers and companies on board with this?
It's mixed, as you'd expect. We've seen support for stricter rules from groups like the Small Business and Transportation Coalition, the SBTC, and also the Wyoming Trucking Association.
Okay, what are they saying?
Well, the SBTC even proposed something back in March, the Safe Motor Carrier Act. They want mandatory English tests for all CDL holders. Their argument is purely safety. You need English to navigate safely, period.
Makes sense from a safety perspective, but what about the pushback?
Yeah, there are definitely concerns. The big one is the driver shortage. It's already bad.
Yeah, big issue. Yeah.
So some worry that if you suddenly tighten the rules and shrink the pool of eligible drivers even more, you could actually make things less safe. Remaining drivers working longer hours, more fatigue.
That's a valid point. The cure could be worse than the disease, potentially.
They're arguing for like a phased approach. Don't just flip a switch, implement any changes gradually to let the industry adjust. It's that classic balancing act. Safety versus the practical economic realities of keeping trucks rolling.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You can't ignore the workforce impact and the supply chain. Major policy shifts need careful thought on the practical side.
It's always useful to see how other places handle this. All right, let's shift gears slightly and look at the accident data. What do the numbers actually say? We found some stats from Consumer Shield for 2025. And they show, interestingly, a decrease in overall truck accidents between 2021 and 2024. And fatal crashes also went down in that period.
So the overall trend is positive. Fewer accidents.
On the surface, yes. Which is obviously good news. Could be better trucks, better roads, other safety measures working. Who knows?
But, and this is big, but I imagine these stats don't specifically track language as a cause, right?
Exactly. That's the crucial point.
Yeah.
The overall numbers are improving, but they don't tell us why. And they definitely don't isolate the impact of language barriers, if any.
Right. We also have FMCSA data showing large trucks were involved in, nearly 10% of fatal crashes in 2023.
Yeah, 9.8%. So even with the downward trend, they're still involved in a significant chunk of the deadliest accidents.
And again, no direct statistical line drawn to language skills in that data.
Nope. Which is where the anecdotal evidence kind of fills a gap, even if you have to take it with a grain of salt.
Right. And then there was that claim, I think it was from Addict Truckers on X, citing a report from Cowboy State Daily about a supposed surge in trucking fatalities linked to poor English skills.
Right. And we have to stress that specific claim about a surge linked to language seems unverified. But it shows how the narrative connecting language and safety is definitely out there and spreading online.
It shows the perception is growing, whether the hard data backs it up fully or not. People believe it's a factor.
Okay, let's circle back to the actual rules and how they're supposed to work. The federal regulation itself, 49 CFR section 391.11b2. It basically says drivers have to read and speak English well enough to talk to the public, understand signs, respond to officials. Pretty clear.
So the rule itself isn't ambiguous.
Not that we could find. It shows broad enforcement is happening, but the lack of language-specific data makes it hard to gauge the scale of that particular issue from those campaigns.
So the picture on enforcement is murky. Some specific state actions, questions about federal consistency, data gaps.
Pretty much. Now, public feeling, at least judging by some online chatter, seems pretty strongly in favor of stricter English rules.
Yeah. What are people saying?
We saw posts on X, people identifying as truckers, other users, basically saying, look, you have to understand English to be safe out here. It's fundamental.
That SBTC argument about missing critical signs probably resonates with a lot of people, too.
Absolutely. And media coverage, especially in places like Cowboy State Daily, often frames it very directly as a public safety issue, cause and effect.
So you have truckers, industry groups, public voices, kind of converging on the idea that communication is key for safety.
Yes, but... and this is really important, we have to look at the other side, too.
Okay. What are the counter-arguments or concerns?
Well, mainstream media, more left-leaning outlets, they've raised flags about potentially discriminating against immigrant workers. Is this fair? Does it target them unfairly?
That's a serious concern. The workforce is diverse.
And civil rights groups have gone further, calling these kinds of moves potentially xenophobic.
Okay, so there's a real tension there. Safety versus fairness and potential discrimination. How do you balance those?
That's the core question, isn't it? How do you ensure safety without creating undue hardship or appearing discriminatory, especially given the industry relies heavily on immigrant labor in many areas?
It's a tough needle to thread.
Geotab found that while big trucks aren't in the most accidents overall, they are involved in a disproportionately high number of the fatal ones.
Right. When a truck crash happens, it's more likely to be deadly, especially for people in the other vehicles involved.
Exactly. And Sabbath Law actually reported an increase in fatal truck crashes between 2021 and 2022, which kind of goes against that broader downward trend we saw earlier.
So conflicting data points there, or maybe different time frames.
Could be different methodologies or specific years looked at, but it underscores that fatal truck crashes remain a huge problem, making people look harder at all possible contributing factors, including language. Forbes Advisor put the average injury crash cost around $150,000 and a fatal one, upwards of $7 million. It is. That's the potential upside, but then you have the immediate costs.
Right, so if these rules take even more drivers off the road, what happens to freight costs, supply chains?
Exactly. Cloud trucks' estimated freight costs could jump 10–15% in some areas if the driver pool shrinks because of this.
So it's this classic cost-benefit puzzle. Potential long-term savings from fewer accidents versus definite short-term costs for training and potentially higher freight prices due to fewer drivers.
A very delicate balance with big implications either way.
Okay, so let's tie this back directly to President Trump's policies again. That March 1st EO making English official.
Right. That set the stage. It provided the policy foundation.
And this new expected order for trucking is like the specific action plan for that sector. It's meant to give those existing language rules real enforcement power.
Yeah, directing the DOT to strengthen inspections, use those out-of-service orders for violations. It's clearly meant to signal a tougher approach. It directly addresses that perception that enforcement got weaker after 2015, 2016.
And people like Rep. Hageman and groups like the SBTC have been calling for exactly this, right? Reverse the old guidance, maybe even test English as part of getting the CDL.
Absolutely. They've been pushing this angle hard. And with states like Arkansas already passing laws, you see this momentum building from different directions, federal, state, industry groups.
It suggests growing consensus, at least among certain players, that the status quo on language enforcement isn't working.
And even though Trump himself might not have talked specifically about trucking regs constantly on the campaign trail,
No, probably not top of the list.
his overall emphasis on English for safety and culture, plus the loud support from allies like Hageman, Senator Barrasso, even someone like Elon Musk chiming in, it all sends a clear signal.
Yeah, the executive orders, the allies, the state actions, it paints a picture of a concerted push on this.
Finally, the way the media is covering this really shows the split.
How so?
You've got supportive outlets, industry press, framing it as just common sense safety. They often highlight those anecdotal crash stories.
Okay, the safety first angle.
Then you have mainstream and left-leaning media raising those red flags about immigrant workers, discrimination potential.
Right, the fairness and impact concerns.
Civil rights groups explicitly calling it xenophobic. And you even have online misinformation muddying the waters, like those unverified claims about roadside English tests happening everywhere in Arkansas needing fact checks.
So the media landscape reflects the core tensions perfectly. Safety versus fairness, economic impacts, potential discrimination, it's all there in the coverage.
Exactly. It mirrors the complexity of the issue itself.
So wrapping this up, it's really clear there are no easy answers here. You've got genuine safety arguments backed by some data and a lot of anecdotal concern about language barriers causing accidents.
Definitely.
But on the flip side, you have huge economic factors, the driver shortage, potential impacts on individual rights and livelihoods, and real questions about how you'd even enforce this effectively and fairly across the board.
And all of it is happening under the umbrella of this bigger push to establish English as the official language. Trump's actions are definitely fueling this debate.
It's complex, resists simple right or wrong answers. Hopefully, listeners have a better grasp now of all the different pieces involved.
Yeah, you should definitely have a much deeper understanding now of just how many different facets there are to this whole issue of English proficiency for truck drivers in the U.S.